Okay. Oh, and then there's Henry. Okay, um, so why don't I start by just giving you a little bit of background about the book. So let me do this. Spotlight. There we go. Yep. Okay, so this is the book we're doing, Living Untethered by Michael Singer. And that's what the book looks like in most of the editions that I've seen. And so you'll see I've tried to find all sorts of wild horses in the images I'll be using tonight. Michael Singer is a native of Florida. He lives in the woods, actually, in Florida. He was born in New York State, though. He was born in 1947 in New York State. And they soon moved to Miami, and his father was a stockbroker. He got a bachelor's degree in business, and he's actually a businessman by training. As much as he's really, really astute spiritually, his academic training is in business. And he's actually been quite successful as a software developer, and specifically software development of medical software. And I get the feeling that he made a fair bit of money doing it. In the early 1970s, though, he took up yoga and meditation. And he had a spiritual epiphany at one point where it just sort of all suddenly started making sense for him. And he decided to devote his life to understanding the spiritual side of life, mostly from a Hindu perspective. In 1975, he opened up a meditation retreat called the Temple of the Universe, which is still in Florida, still operating. The book that drew my attention to him was The Untethered Soul, which was a major bestseller back in 2007. And if you loved Living Untethered, you'll also like The Untethered Soul. The Untethered Soul really deals with just one part of the argument of living untethered. It really focuses on what's going on in your head and why, and we'll be talking about that. So you'll find some of it similar, but it's still a really, really good book. So I want to walk us through his basic argument, and we'll start here. Actually, before I do that, just give me a second here. I want to just sort of talk you through the basics of him. Singer's concern is about what goes on in our head, literally our state of mind. The voices and the feelings and the memories which occur in our head, that in our stream of consciousness, literally the quality of what goes on in our head, that's what he's concerned about. If you're not happy in your head, then you're not happy at all, right? You know, there's no point in, you know, you can have a big house, you can have fantastic cars, you can have an important job, you can, you know, have fame and fortune, but if inside you're constantly struggling with thoughts which are bothering you, then your life is not working out well. So he really makes the argument that the quality of what goes on in your head, it pretty much defines your life experience and whether your life's going well for you. Other people may think you have the best life in the world, but you know the truth. And, you know, lots of Hollywood stars can attest to this, right? You know, they walk around, the cameras flash everywhere they go, everybody thinks they're beautiful, and then suddenly they're in rehab because they've been secretly miserable the whole time. So it matters a lot what goes on in here. And tonight I'm going to talk about his diagnosis of what goes on in our head. And the first step, the first step in his argument is just to observe that most of us aren't terribly introspective about the quality of what goes on in our heads. Most of us, you know, if we feel ourselves gripped with a bad mood, sadness, depression, anger, we generally assume that the cause of those bad feelings is external and the solution to them will be external as well. So I'm going to just read this little quote from his book. Life doesn't have to be a game of, since it's not nice in my mind, I need to find things that will compensate for that in order to feel a little bit better. That's what everybody's doing. They're trying to find people, places, and things in the outside world so it'll unfold in a way that it makes it more comfortable inside. people are trying to fix, or people are trying to use the outside to fix the inside. And we'd be better off finding out why it's not so nice inside to begin with. What I suggest is think about this. If you get into a bad mood or you're frustrated, what do you do to make yourself feel better? And I want to throw this out to the crowd, like literally, what do you do if you're in a bad mood? What do you do to feel better? Maybe you can use the raise hand function to. Oh, Rosie, go ahead.
I listen to music.
Listen to music. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Sheila, I play Scrabble online.
Okay. Anything else? Donna, what do you do? If you get into a bad mood, what do you do to feel better?
I go for a walk. I do something physical,
Cool.
just to try to think about it and move it out.
Great.
But think
Marilyn?
about it first. Try to get into it first.
Right. Okay. Bonnie?
Yes, I go for a walk too. The best is forest bathing. I have a little trail and some little piece of woods not too far from the house. So that's the best and fastest cure.
And just out of curiosity, did your 40-year-old self do that?
Oh, no. No. What did my 40-year-old self do? Huh. I went out on demonstrations, I suppose, for peace and anti-nuclear movements and civil rights and activism.
Let's say you were just having a bad day. You just, a cranky day.
Cranky day. Huh.
Hard to remember 40 years ago or so.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, I'll move on. Marilyn, how do you deal with things?
Well, it's similar in terms of going for a walk. And it's been a really difficult 6-7 months for me because I have a real flare up of a back problem and not able to walk more than 10 minutes or so. But I do drive over to the Sunnybrook Park and whatever. But if I wanted to be totally honest, what I do to feel better, and if I go back to my 40-year-old, I eat. There's certain addictions. There's a certain reach for something that's comforting. And that would not be celery. It would be some of that other. So as I've gotten older, I've become more conscious. I had a fair bit of therapy and whatever. So food's not my go-to. Walking is my go-to. I like to read. I've always got at least a couple of books on the go. But if I'm honest, that pattern over the years of soothing myself with food it's not been as good for me as a walk in the woods.
Right. Yep. And Anne, what works for you?
For me, I like to laugh. So it's usually a comedy show in YouTube or jokes, Google jokes, or I always have a stack of funny stuff. And it just lightens my mood. For me, it's my go-to thing. I've got to laugh. If I'm not laughing, something's terribly wrong.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, folks often talk about retail therapy, right? They get into a bad mood, so they go to the store and they buy a new pair of shoes, or they buy, something sweet to eat, like Marilyn was saying. And the singer talks about how, for a lot of us, if something's going wrong inside, often, first of all, we'll blame the outside for the origin of the bad mood. And also we'll try and fix it by going to something external to ourselves, rather than really sitting down with ourselves and trying to figure out what's actually going on inside ourselves. And his model of understanding who we are inside goes like this. He says that there's 3 things which we experience on the inside. And that's sensory impressions is the first one. So the things which come from our senses, right? What we hear, what we see, what we taste, what we feel with our skin. So we can't help but have those come in. Even with your eyes closed, you're going to hear things and you'll feel things. And then the second one is emotions. You know, it's very rare that we find ourselves in a state where we have no emotions going on inside us at all. And then the third one are, of course, thoughts, right? And at any point in time, we've got some combination of these three things going on in our heads, right? We're having some kind of thought, we're having some sort of feeling, and we're aware of the external world in some way. He asks, so who are we really? Are we our thoughts? Are we our emotions? Are we our sensations? Who is the real you? It's sort of like, you know, that old show, will the real, you know, Mr. So-and-so please stand up? You know, which is the real you? And he argues that most of the time we identify with our thoughts, right? So as spontaneously we, you know, see someone walk by in an ugly dress, we'll go, oh, that dress is ugly. And if someone asked us, what do you think? We'd say, oh, I think that dress is ugly. Like, I'm doing the thinking, that thought occurred to me, that is what I think. And if it's raining like it was today, you might go, oh, I hate rain, right? Or you're in a coffee shop listening to some music and you go, oh, I hate this music, it doesn't sound like anything. And most of us identify with our thoughts as though our thoughts are us, right? Like they're actually who we are. Any thought that comes into our mind is pretty much the thoughts which we grab onto and we identify with. And, you know, think about the things which you think about, you talk about when you get together with friends. Hi, how are you? Well, this is how I'm feeling. You know, how's your day going? Oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. Most of us are very opinionated. We always have an opinion about what's going on in our life, and usually about what's going on in life around us. You know, and, you know, we're living through very troubling times right now. So lots of us have opinions. And if you think back to the first 2 years of the Trump administration, everybody had opinions about things which were happening in a country that we don't live in, right? Like we were constantly trying to come to grips with what was happening around us because it was so surprising. Singer argues that, sorry, let me just get here. So Singer makes an argument about how the way we perceive the world is kind of flawed. And to get to that, what I'd like to do is ask you a question. He deals with it in a sort of Big Bang kind of way, which is kind of abstract. So I want to do it in a little more personal way. If you have a best friend or a lover in your life, how did you meet them? That's my question for you. How did you meet? You know, that first time you ever met them, how did you actually meet? Does anyone want to volunteer a getting together story? Rosie?
In the parking lot of my apartment.
Okay, and where did that person come from?
He was on his way to work.
Okay, and did he live in your apartment building? Or?
No way, no. He had just come by. He saw me getting out of my car and trying to manage with my groceries and all my stuff. And he said, would you like some help?
Nice. And did you get to know this? You got to know
To
this
which I said, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did. Very well.
Okay.
I'm talking about Bob, Bonnie.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And
Okay.
do you know where he came from? Like, how did he come to Toronto?
Oh, that I don't know really, but he'd been in Toronto a long time.
Okay.
He'd also been in World War II. He was a
Sorry.
dispatch rider
Okay, cool.
in World War II.
And ethnically, what background did he have?
Oh, he's Canadian.
And before that, his parents?
Oh, I don't know that.
Okay. Any other first meeting stories? Hey, Rebecca. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. Probably not many people know me here, but I'm Paul Winkleman's partner, and we met in grade 10 high school choir practice.
How appropriate.
Mhm.
And okay, so what I'm interested in is, so you met there and you guys were out west, right, in BC?
Yeah, Victoria.
Okay, all right. And your parents, had they always been in BC?
Um, well, no, my family had moved from Nova Scotia just a few years before, myself
Okay,
included.
all right. So they were from out east. And what about Paul's parents?
Yeah, he was born there, and I think a lot of his family's Canadian, quite fairly far back, but before that, maybe Dutch, Belgium.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So Holland to BC to high school to meeting you, and your folks had just come from Nova Scotia. And where were they before Nova Scotia?
Um, back in BC, and I guess before that, maybe England. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right. So the reason I'm trying to suss out these stories is that when two people meet, sometimes if it's in high school, it may seem, well, they're both students in the same high school, but a whole chain of events have to have happened for that meeting to occur, right? You know, Rebecca's parents had to decide when they were living in Nova Scotia that they were going to move to British Columbia. Paul's parents his family may have been in BC for a couple of generations, but before that, they were in Holland. So a whole lot of things come together so that two people can meet at one particular moment in time, right? And had Paul's parents not met, then Paul wouldn't exist and Paul wouldn't get to meet Rebecca. If Rebecca's parents had decided, oh, you know what? There's a job that we could take right here in Nova Scotia. We don't need to move to BC anymore. Then poof, Rebecca never meets Paul, right? There are all these very, very complicated causal chains which come together to make even simple things like meeting in a parking lot or meeting in high school happen, right? And Singer makes the argument that the whole universe has basically been working on getting you to each moment all the time. There's 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, which leads to Rebecca meeting Paul in high school in BC. Now that may seem like kind of a lot of weight to put on it, but the fact is that we are all made of atoms which were generated inside stars, which exploded. And then that stardust floated around and then swirled and got caught up by gravity and became planets, and then that planet evolved. Like a whole lot of complicated things have been happening to get to the point where Rosie meets someone in the parking lot and Rebecca meets Paul in high school. And Singer's argument is when something happens like that, when it's bad, when you wish it hadn't happened, like say someone cuts you off in traffic, and you yell at them, right? Even though they're gone, they're driving away, they can't hear you. You are yelling at the universe, right? 100 million decisions have been made to get to the point where that cyclist cut you off as you were driving down the street. And you think that the right emotional reaction is to yell at that person as though you could change all of that chain of events which led to that moment where that cyclist thought it was a good time to cut in front of you. Probably not thinking about you at all in any way whatsoever. Bonnie, is that a hand up?
No, I was catching a bug.
Oh.
I'm sorry, that was very ordinary. Had nothing to do with his soul or the universe.
But Singer's point is a lot of the time we walk around frustrated with the world because we wish it could be other than it is. And yet, so many things have gone into making the world happen the way it's happening right now that it's you against the universe when you get mad at events happening that you can't change, right? The moment after the person cuts you off and they've driven away and they don't even know that you exist and you're still angry about it, you are wasting your time. You are wasting your soul time, basically, because you could be having a good time, but instead you're mad at somebody. And you're basically mad at the universe because the universe took 13.8 billion years to produce that person doing that thing which annoyed you. And there's not a darn thing you can do about the fact that it happened. You might go to city council and argue for better traffic laws and stuff. You can change the future, but you can't change the past. And so Singer is really trying to get us to think beyond being locked into what we think are perfectly justifiable emotions when we get angry to people. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. Any thoughts, comments? Some of you have read the book, so you know how he presented this argument. Does that make sense at all to you?
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes, it does. Where's that anger coming from?
Oh.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get into that too. Donna?
And my thought when I was reading that part of the book is how much time I've wasted and how it doesn't matter, because it's gone in a flash, and I'm angry or vexed about something for a lot longer than the flash. And so it's wasting my time. But the question then, of course, is how to get rid of that.
Yeah, exactly. And we will talk about that, I promise. But tonight I just want to get into the depths of his diagnosis about why this happens. I mean, have any of you had experiences which you found it really, really hard to let go of? I'm not asking you to reveal, deep family traumas. Things can be more innocent than that and hard to let go of. Marilyn?
Now I'm unmuted. I mean, I've got family and personal stuff, but what comes to mind for me is my working life, and in management, administrative roles, and particularly around in my nursing, obstetrics and family-centered care. And I can remember just feeling so angry and frustrated at the slowness of response, particularly from the medical hierarchy when we were trying to have dads in the delivery room. Imagine a mom could have her baby in the room with her, not in a box in the nursery. And I can just remember a righteous anger. I don't know what other word to use. Like, that anger propelled me to write briefs to the government for birthing centers and midwifery and things that turned out to be very worthwhile for me. But I can remember the intensity, and I didn't do a good job at letting that drain away. Maybe I was able to channel it in some ways, but I was angry, really angry.
Yeah, when I was younger in the film business, I had a boss who was a part owner of the company I was working for, but she wasn't good at her job, and yet she had lots of power. And I used to spend all weekend angry, just fuming about the inefficiencies and the this and the that and the this and the that. I could not bear the fact that someone was in charge of me who didn't know how to do her job very well. I couldn't accept that situation. And yet she was barely aware of any of that from me, but boy, did it ever ruin a lot of my weekends. So why? And Singer has a good quote about this. Let me just pull it up. Make this bigger. Right? So one of the most amazing things you will ever realize is that the moment in front of you was not bothering you. You were bothering yourself about the moment in front of you. It's not personal. You're making it personal.
It's so true.
Right? Like, we make it seem as though the world is against us. It isn't. The world is just being the world. The vast majority of the things which annoy us about the world have no idea that we exist. They're just doing their own thing. And yet we take it personally, as though the world was trying to mess us up. And we waste so much emotional time doing that. And, you know, like this perspective is not exactly new. It's something which our spiritual teachers have been saying for a long time. So Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Right? And the Buddha said, "Let none find fault with others. Let none see the omissions and commissions of others, but let one see one's own acts done and undone." And, you know, neither one of these is supposed to be interpreted morally, as though it's a moral duty to get this right. Rather, it's just good old common sense. Like, you are wasting your time if you walk around judging others. You know, I think the older we get, the more we realize that you can't convince anyone of anything unless they're ready to be convinced. Unless they've reached that point where they're ready to make that next step in their journey, right? And you can tell them 5 years before that exactly what they're going to end up doing, and they won't listen, and they may get really mad at you for offering unwanted advice. And it's just a waste of time, because everybody's just where they are with the amount of understanding that they have at that moment. So if you judge them for not being where they're going to be 3 years from now, you are wasting your time and theirs and everybody's. And you're hardening your arteries, and you're just making a date with the cardiologist, but you're not changing the world in an effective way.
And Stephen, I like the way he, as that singer talked about the weather, because recently when we've had so much rain and I've been drenched getting to church or getting home, and he said, in that one passage, he said, "Forget the weather. It is what it is. You're going to get it no matter what, and you can't do anything about it."
That's right.
So you dress for it.
I just fart, but I still get wet.
Oh, yeah. I got wet.
And it's
But yes.
funny. It's funny the gradations of things that we will judge and what we won't judge. For instance, who has an opinion about the spots on the moon? Right? We just don't. The moon is the moon. It doesn't occur to us that we could have an opinion. Oh, I don't like the way the moon looks. You know, like, that's stupid, right? Same thing with Lake Ontario. Who likes or doesn't like Lake Ontario? It's just a lake. It just is what it is. We accept it for what it is, right? We don't have any opinions about it. But as we get closer and closer to people, then that opinion program kicks in, right? And we can start making decisions about, you know, how another person acts. And, you know, you can have opinions about entire cities. You know, I hate New York. I love New York. But we seem to realize that the natural world is beyond opinion. You know, I mean, we can dislike the weather, but we don't say, "I hate clouds," right? So it's a funny thing. It's like our social intelligence globs onto things and says, "Okay, I can judge this stuff, but other things I'm not going to bother with." So the question then is, if we shouldn't be judging others, and to some extent the world when we do, how do we get around this? And Singer's answer comes from talking about an experience of mind, which I think a number of you are familiar with, which is something which people experience when they meditate. So let me just put up a couple of slides here. So Singer, because he came to this through meditation, talks about it this way. So when people meditate, they experience, as we all do from moment to moment, their thoughts, emotions, and sensations, right? But when you're meditating, you're supposed to treat those thoughts and emotions and sensations like clouds. They're just supposed to pass by. They're not supposed to be something which you hang on to, right? So meditators are taught, focus on your breath. If you use a mantra, use that with some regularity to give your thinking brain something to do. But if you hear the thought, my boss is annoying, instead of diving right in and thinking up of all sorts of examples and filling out that thought, you're supposed to just let it drift by. And it will go away. And if you're feeling worried about something, just let it go. Don't invest in it. And this is very hard to do, particularly when you first start meditating, because we're so used to following up thoughts with more thoughts and building on that premise. But meditators are taught, just let it go. As you get better, you learn how to just allow thoughts to keep on going. And Singer's point is that you are not your thoughts, and you are not your emotions, and you are not your sensory perceptions, but you are your consciousness, which observes thoughts, emotions, and sensations. You are separate from your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Now, I know we have meditators in the room, so I'm going to open the floor to you guys. You guys meditate. What's your experience of feeling separate from your thoughts when you meditate?
Well, it's amazing calm. Am I in?
Yep, we can hear you.
Amazing calm. But the challenge for me is to just, the thoughts come in and then not to judge yourself. And then you just let it roll on by. And it just takes you down to another level, which is really, really nourishing.
Yeah, and it's weird to realize that you are not your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Any other meditators have this experience? I mean, is it easy to let a thought pass by?
Well, sometimes
It's a big timeout.
Yeah.
Marilyn, you've got your hand raised.
It's interesting, at the meditation group yesterday, the person, Kristen Neff, her name is, and her area of mindfulness is radical self-compassion. And at one point, and it was mostly breathing, and of course, to just let the thoughts go by. But she did acknowledge that that's not always easy, and everyone will have some thoughts when they're meditating. Because I find sometimes we judge ourselves so harshly. Oh, I was thinking again. Well, I'm not supposed to think. I'm not doing it right. Meditation is not going to work. And it goes into that spiral. So it's not easy. And but that basic suspending the judgment, as you had on the slide a few minutes ago, for me, that's the ground, the grounding. That's where it grows from, where we can suspend our judgment. And because it's the judging and that traps us. And so I like to encourage the group that we meet with on Monday to really pay attention to suspending the self-judgment. Let that cloud go by. Yeah.
Including the cloud that says I'm not doing it right.
That's the big one for me.
And for me too. That was so helpful yesterday, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Rebecca, and you're muted. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I find it really helpful when I'm meditating to remember that getting lost in thoughts is part of the process. It's you can't learn to stop getting lost in thoughts unless you get lost in them and notice and come back. And so I try to remember that this is a really important part of the process and that you can't grow without it, instead of getting frustrated. But it's a slow process to break the habits of thoughts. That's what I've certainly found.
And it's weird when it works, right? Like when you realize that you haven't had a thought, for a few seconds or whatever. Of course, while you weren't having that thought, you weren't thinking anything. So it doesn't register in the same way, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I just went without having a thought. And then
I love that. Oh, I'm doing so well. Oh, wait.
Exactly. It's very, very slippery, you know. But Singer's point is that you are not your thoughts, and you are not your emotions, and you are not the sound of the birds or the hum of the refrigerator. You are just the consciousness which observes those things, and you can choose to identify with them, but that is a path of pain. That is the road to suffering. You know, the Buddha famously said that, you know, life is suffering. And he didn't just mean objectively, like, you know, people go hungry and so forth. He meant internally. Life is suffering because we get attached to our thoughts. We get attached to ideas and we torture ourselves with them. And it's funny, you know, when you think about how do thoughts happen, we tend to say, I think this, I think that. But the reality is, the way in which our language records thoughts, it says things like, it occurred to me, I had a thought, an idea popped into my head. We receive thoughts. We don't actually produce them. Right? Like the part of us which is conscious of thoughts doesn't actually come up with the thought. We are aware of their arrival. And creative people are really learn this, and they learn this. You know, I spent many years as a writer, so I know lots of creative people, and I have to write sermons every week and so forth. And I don't write sermons. I listen to sermons. I wake up in the morning and I go, hey, the scripture reading is this. And then I listen for the thoughts which come into my head about how that scripture reading makes me think of this thing and makes me think of that thing and makes me think of this, makes me think of that. I'm not doing the thinking, I'm listening to the thinking.
Where does it come from then?
Ah, well, good question. We could debate that for a long time. I mean, you know, is it my muse? Is it the Holy Spirit? Is it my subconscious? You know, people have had lots of different terms for that, right? But the key thing is that it's important to recognize it's not the conscious you who thinks it is, who is thinking this stuff up. Because if it were, you could sit down and say, I'm going to have a brilliant idea now. And that is decidedly not how it works. If only. And yet we take credit for our thoughts all the time.
Bingo. Yeah.
We identify with them, they become our brand, but we don't actually come up with them. We receive them. Anne?
Yeah, no, it's like a bell for me. It's I listen to when you talk to hear the sound of a clear bell, the sound of a bell, and that's when I keep coming back, because it's that ring of truth. And I don't know if I make sense, but for me, I hear like a pure sound, and I don't know where it comes from, but for me, that's what is, I don't know, the universe, or the goodness of the universe, or the truth presenting itself. I don't really know.
And there's value in being humble about that. Donna?
Well, I just want to share with everyone that I'm ADHD and I can't meditate. So I'm listening to all of you talk about meditation, and my husband meditates. And when he's meditating, I can feel him way up there. Our dog also goes way up there with him, but I do not. I've tried to meditate, but the thoughts just go boom, boom, boom. And Stephen, I also have, I have my degree in journalism as well. So boom, boom, boom. I just can't figure out how to clear the cobwebs. And I would love to, because I really feel I'd have much more calmness. But
Yeah, I
so
mean,
far I have not been able to do it. And about 10 years ago, a lovely lady at ESG asked me if I would join the prayer group, which they do every year during Lent. And I had to give her a very honest reason, but I know that it was definitely the weirdest thing she'd ever heard, which is, I'd love to join your prayer group, but I can't stay still that long. I do think my answer was authentic, and she was very kind. She didn't judge me, but I think I completely gobsmacked her.
if it makes you feel any better, I'm also ADHD. And what I have just, I mean, the way I deal with it is I get a lot of exercise every day,
Yeah,
which helps burn out a lot of that stuff. So I ride for half an hour, pretty much every weekday. Oh, sorry, I ride for an hour, but in
yeah,
half an
you
hour.
ride to work a lot, right?
Yeah, on Sunday mornings when, which is, in principle should be a stressful time for me since I'm going to be up in front of a whole bunch of people and all that stuff. I'll ride all the way to work, and that's an hour long, up a lot of hills thanks to,
Yeah.
the bluer. And that helps burn out a lot of stuff. And I tend to meditate on those mornings as well, whenever I
So
can.
that's interesting. So you do the exercise and then you try to meditate.
Not on weekdays. Weekdays, what I do is I meditate outside, so I'll have lots of stimulation. Like I'll wrap myself in blankets so I can hear the birds chirping and stuff like that,
Right.
which helps me settle down. So we should talk later.
Yeah. No, I do exercises for an hour and a half every day in the morning. Like I do chores just to ground myself.
Yep. And that's
Anyway, I'm jealous and happy for all of you who can meditate.
but in a funny
And
way, I
Donna,
think
Donna, you might like Stephen's prayer group because we're small. We're online. We're not face to face like in a church. And if you didn't like it, just leave.
yeah, or walk around the room. We won't notice, right?
This is true.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind trying. I've so far just I can do yoga, but that's about it.
Wednesdays at 3. Just look at our
Okay.
website and you'll
I
find it.
just wrote that down.
But I think our age is sort of an ADHD age, in that everybody is looking to be distracted all the time. I live close to High Park, and when I go into High Park, there's basically two or three categories of people there, and the largest category are the dog walkers. There's lots and lots of people walking their dogs, and there's joggers and there's walkers, but mostly it's dog walkers. And over the last 10 or 15 years, the proportion of people who walk their dogs with headphones on has just jumped through the roof. Almost everybody has headphones on now as they walk through High Park. They're listening to podcasts, they're listening to music, they're often talking to friends on the phone. But what they're not hearing are birds.
Yeah.
Or anything around them, because they are having another experience entirely because they're listening to the daily, or they're listening to music, or they're talking to a friend. They're everywhere but in the park, right?
Yeah, wow.
And that's just become normal now. It's not a healthy thing, but it's a normal thing. And and it assumes that there's nothing going on in the park worth paying attention to, which I think is a grave mistake. But if you don't want to calm down, then it makes sense that I'm being unproductive being in the park. So I should hear a podcast, or I should talk to a friend, or I should send some texts, right? Like people are on all the time. And that is not good for our mental state. Spiritual traditions, of course, argue that being productive is not the be-all, end-all of the human condition. And all of the spiritual traditions, at least the major ones, all argue that there is a mental state which is possible when you stop clinging and attaching to your thoughts and emotions. And you can realize that those are clouds that pass on through, and you don't have to grab onto them. Then you become open to a kind of being, a form of consciousness inside you, which most people only experience furtively and briefly, but which can become more sustained, and which is an extraordinarily healthy and rewarding way to be. And I just want to pull up another quote here from our spiritual tradition. Jesus said, you know, can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Nope. Nope. We do it anyway, but it's not going to work, right? So, drawing on Hinduism and Buddhism, Singer argues that there's actually 4 mental states that are possible for us. And the 4th one, oh, this is actually what he says about that 4th state. This is what Christ taught you, what Buddha taught you, what all the great spiritual masters of every tradition taught. The kingdom is within you. You in there are a very great being made in the image of God, but to know that, you have to free yourself from all the inner commotion. In the Christian tradition, this is known as the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. And the traditional interpretations of Christianity usually make this sound as though it's a place, right? A place that we reach after death, or it's a state of society which we might one day reach, right? Where everything is going to be fair and wonderful. It's sort of like the lefties' version of heaven, where it happens on earth and everything's going to be great, right? But Jesus also talks about it as being a state of mind which can be accomplished by individuals, and not just Jesus, but by regular individuals. And when he sends the disciples out into the villages, you know, where he famously says, if they don't accept you, just walk out of town and, you know, tap your sandals together and let the dust fall off your feet. He says, when you come to those villages, let them know the kingdom of heaven is near. And what he means is the disciples have got the kingdom of heaven going on inside them. And they have come near, and they've brought the fruits of the kingdom of heaven to these people. There's a state of mind that you can cultivate, which is about the kingdom of heaven. And the way Jesus put it explicitly is like this. Once Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming. And he answered, the kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed. Nor will they say, here it is, or there it is, for in fact, the kingdom of God is within you.
Or not.
And he also put it in terms of parables. This happens a lot. He said at one point, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and he sells all that he has and he buys that field. Now, what's interesting is this guy had other possessions. You know, we're speaking symbolically here, right? This guy has other possessions, other things which occupy his time and his mind, but he sells them all so that he can have this one thing, which is the kingdom of heaven. And I think the way we can interpret that is the kingdom of heaven is a form of consciousness, which is actually the root consciousness within every single human being alive. But it gets obscured. Singer talks about it as though it's a spring of water which goes towards the surface, but it gets blocked by our thoughts and emotions and memories of things which upset us, so that this sort of spontaneous spring can't reach the surface very often. So you occasionally see a sunset which takes your breath away. But other times you're listening to a podcast, or you're answering the phone, or you're thinking about how much you've got to get done at work. And you don't see the sunset. You've probably missed more sunsets than you've ever noticed because of the chatter that goes on inside our heads. That chatter is what makes up being a responsible person, if you think that your identity is rooted in being productive all the time. But our spiritual traditions suggest that actually you have a much, much higher calling. And that is to let those clouds go by so that you can be actually attuned to who you are and everything else around you. So you can actually notice the beauty which is around you all the time. It's a very heretical idea, all things considered. It's not at all like working 60 hours a week and checking your emails all the time. Instead, it's asking you to be very, very present and enjoy the world around you as it is and see the beauty around you. And stop taking it so personally when you think that things aren't going so well. Why don't I pause there for a second? Any thoughts? Reactions?
Right on.
Need to hear that. More than
Marilyn?
once.
Marilyn? Oh, you're muted, Marilyn. We can't hear you.
Talking to myself.
Yes.
I think I am anyway. No, a couple of minutes ago, you used the phrase that we can come to a state of mind that would be better than the clutter. And yet we have this challenge about our thinking is not who we are, but are we also trying to have a certain state of mind? The singer saying, it still hasn't all come clear for me yet to, if you think of the old phrase, I think, therefore I am. Otherwise, how do I know I am? So I just would be interested in your phrase, state of mind.
Well, yeah, I think it's a good phrase because a state isn't something which you achieve, it's something which just exists.
Okay.
Right. And he would argue that this state of mind has always existed within you, but it just gets obscured by all that clutter.
Okay.
And you think about, Christ at one point takes a child onto his lap and he says, if you want to get into the kingdom of heaven, you need to be humble like a child, right? And children, they, especially toddlers, right? How is it that they can be screaming and then laughing 20 seconds later? They shift gears extraordinarily quickly, right? They don't get hung up on things. They don't grab onto that cloud and say, I want this cloud to stay. They can be easily distracted and they can move from one thing to another. And they're full of wonder. I mean, not all the time, but, at their best they are. So I think the idea is that there is this natural state which we are born with, which is like a spring of cold, beautiful water, which gets clogged up and obstacles are put into its path within our heads because we're clinging to things which we want to think about and perseverate about and be obsessed about. And when we're doing that, all that negative energy that goes into being so right about how my boss is so wrong, this sort of beautiful energy can't get through that kind of massive glutinous stuff. And?
Yeah, you mentioned root. You said root, the root is blocked, the root of it. And I think the blockage is partly society. For me personally, I had to grow a thick skin in Toronto to function. You had to be tough to live in the city, and sort of alienate myself from myself to function. So that is a crust on me. And the other one was, I'm starting to understand the damage that the Old Testament God kind of messed me up. And then there's the New Testament. So I'm going to we'll explore that more. I think those are the blockages that block my root. It blocks me from shifting from my I think this and I think all kinds of bad stuff to really listening to myself, what's really going on. And sometimes when it's coming up, whatever's going on, that flowing water, it's not always flowing water. When it comes up, it's not pleasant. So another block. It's another block. But I know now that my thinking is not helping me, and I would like to be more able to sink down into the root, but I'm not there yet. No.
Yeah, and this is hard work, and one of the reasons why is that Sue, I think early on you asked about, why do these bothersome thoughts come into our heads? And Singer's argument is a lot of it is due to experiences you've had in the past, which involve conflict, which you weren't able to fully resolve, and so they just got stored, unresolved inside of you. And I think, anybody who's been in a marriage has had experiences where, you drop a dish onto the floor and it breaks. And your partner gets really mad about it. And you go, why? Like, this dish, like, we could replace it for a couple of bucks at IKEA, but apparently this is a really big deal. And later on, when they calm down, they might tell you, when I was growing up, my mom was always all over me about breaking any little thing. And I always hated that. And so when you broke that dish, that just reminded me of all that stuff. And the problem with being a human being is that we all have to be children first. And children are inherently less powerful than the people around them, the adults around them who are raising them. And so inevitably, we are going to be in situations where people who are very powerful do things to us, benign and malign, which bother us, and we can't talk back or are not allowed to talk back to try and clear those blockages, like clear those conflicts, right? There's, hypothetically, my big brother always got the best clothes. I hated that. And you carry that with you. You see at the time, there's nothing to be done about it. The family doesn't have enough money to buy us all new clothes. So it's going to be hand-me-downs for all the younger children. But you may really hate that. And so when you become an adult, those sorts of stacked triggers, memories, all become these things which can be triggered by events in the here and now, dredging up the emotional content as though it was brand new of what you went through 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but suddenly it's all new again, but it's being applied to a situation that has nothing to do with the original situation. And Singer argues that that is actually a lot of the content that goes on in your head day by day. You're just reliving past experiences which didn't get resolved. And you're putting this sort of emotional patina over the present world. In way you're just, and it's a mess because you're not the only one doing it. Everybody's doing it. Mm-hmm. Everybody's doing it, right?
So do you then just let those triggers float by?
You can't, unfortunately, because yeah,
but
you can
just to be aware of that they're happening, and then
yeah, you can be
the only recourse you have.
Well, no. And this is what we'll talk about next week in more detail. It's much better if you try to figure out why that bothers you, right? Like not like it's one thing. Yeah, like it's one thing to say, let's say it's a simple thing of somebody drops a dish and you immediately have an emotional reaction, right? Well, you could yell at that point, which will seem like the most obvious thing to do. But being a more higher evolved being after this meeting, you'll go, and then you'll say, oh, geez, I shouldn't say that, but why am I feeling that, right? Why am I feeling that? But unfortunately, your whole body is going to react, right? Like your heart rate will go up, like it's real. It's physically real what's happening there. So to deny that it's happening won't work, right? And won't help either. Ultimately, what he suggests, and we can talk about it more next week, is he talks about you should really start trying to figure out why these things bother you, and if possible, try and track them down to their roots. Like be honest with yourself about, oh, I think this is my childhood again. This is something from my childhood. I should really think this through. Because until you do, that wounded inner child, and it's not always a child, right? But in this case it is, that wounded inner child is just going to keep coming back until it feels like it's being heard and acknowledged.
Stephen, I read the book back in July, and I can't remember what terminology Michael Singer uses for those thoughts that are, I call them the Christmas tree lights, but things that are triggers that have just come in a nice series. And as you say, you have to kind of figure out how to unplug them. Do you remember what he calls it?
Yeah, I think they're called samskara.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
it's the Hindu term.
okay. And is that a term that is well known, or?
Well, not within Christianity, but I assume it is in Hinduism. I don't know. Personally, it's been ages since I read any Hindu texts, so I can't swear to this one way or another.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting thought that helped me understand that these are all connected. Because the only time I ever heard about that concept was talking to a therapist many, many years ago in my 20s, who talked about the Christmas tree lights. That's very Christian, obviously, but the string of lights all connected, and that once you have something happen, usually in early childhood, then you have another one and you gather that one in the series of the lights, then you gather the next one. And so they keep compounding, if you like, until you unravel the one that triggered it all.
Yeah, and it's really hard in that, you know, if say your parent was an alcoholic, right? The children of alcoholics have to develop defense procedures so that they can protect themselves from mom or dad when they get really drunk, and also who's going to make the lunches and who's going to get, you know, your little brother to school. Like, you know, some people end up being hyper organized because they end up having to be a mini parent way too young. Right? And then those habits of being highly responsible and always being able to plan ahead carry on into their adult life. It makes them extraordinarily useful in workplaces. But it's all a strategy for dealing with a trauma which hasn't been resolved, because no one ever apologized for being an alcoholic parent, right? You know, like in that person's case. And so this is the tough part of the second half of life, when you realize, oh man, here I am standing on this mountain of accomplishments. I've gotten this far, but maybe this mountain's not as solid as it seems, and it's about to swallow me. You know?
It's made of sand.
Yeah. And from the outside, people just think that you're really effective. And they keep throwing work at you because you're really effective. Right? Not realizing that was actually just a defensive posture that you adopted as a child. Anne, you've got your hand up.
I didn't lower it, but I wanted to add to, it's not only the children of alcoholics, but it's also children of very dysfunctional families. It's a similar sort of traumatized, and I think I'm a product of that, of a traumatized childhood. So I'm doing a lot of the work that you're talking about here, but for us, the solution is to become, to listen to that child's, what they have to tell us, which is a thing in itself, and then give that, maybe I'm going ahead of you for next week, but to now then give that child what that child is crying for, I now give it to myself. So doing that, though, calls me to be in a room like this, to hear the discussion so that I can then give it to myself. Like, it's almost like modeling good conversation here, but thinking and talking and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I'm saying that it's not only getting in touch with the listening to the voice of that child, but it's also another voice of a loving part of me that then does that. That's where I'm at now, is to listen to both parts of myself. That's why I'm here to sort of figure it out. For me though, the splintering though, I don't know if anybody else in the room has this kind of splintering of the soul, but for me, I was born in India, so I know the word samsara. The Hindi, I know the Hindi words. I grew up, Hindi. But so for me, it's like I have that experience of India, which is one experience, and then that experience of being in Toronto in the 1970s, and now an experience of an older person. So it's like these three pretty challenging life experiences that I'm now taking the time to say, how do I heal my soul? Because it's quite splintered. Do I make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. And one doesn't have to be from as far away as India to feel that way.
Yeah, I would just add that I really think that everybody is a hurt child.
Right.
We're all damaged. Yeah. We might as well admit it. We're all damaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've all got hurts, and when you have children of your own, you wish naively that they will never have any unhappiness. And of course they do. And we all did. And I think trying to accept that hurt child and heal that hurt child is very difficult. One of the things we didn't talk about tonight is that the world is getting more cruel. People are getting exceedingly more rude, more impatient, more, I win, you don't, antagonistic, if you like. And so to try to stay calm and support yourself when people are trying to put you down is a real challenge today.
Absolutely.
I think maybe, and for all of you who meditate, you could share this with me. I think that's what I see as meditation, just gets you away from all of that, just lifts you.
And it also gives you the, it does this literally. Scientific studies have been done on what happens to the brains of meditators, and it actually improves some areas of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of us which does the executive function, right, and does the planning. Mm-hmm. And meditation actually improves your capacity not to be reactive, so that, one person might immediately yell, another person will go, that's annoying, right? And like, that's a big thing. If you can be the person who just goes, that's a little annoying, that's a much easier way of getting through life than to always react and always feel like things are being done to you personally. Now, Sheila, you had your hand up, and then Marilyn.
I'm not sure that I quite understand all of it, but I have read to the end of the book. And my understanding, and this is next week, is that you're aware of the past, but you let it go. I'm not sure that I understand why I'm raising certain issues and then trying to come to terms with them. My understanding from him is that the past is the past. There is no way of changing it. So I'd like a little light shone on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The past is the past, and you can't change it. But I think it was Robert Frost who said, right, the past isn't even past, right, because it lives on within you. So you need to deal with the ghost of the past within you. And if you don't, then it'll just keep knocking at your door, screaming for your attention, and will be triggered by events in the present. And if I can, I'm just going to share a quote that Singer has about this. And then I promise I'll get to you, Marilyn, just a sec.
No problem.
Here, let me just make this big. You are not seeing what is actually outside. You are seeing your inner issues projected onto the outside. That's why life seems so scary and why it always seems to be hitting your weak spots. The truth is, life is not hitting your weak spots. You are projecting your weak spots onto life. Does that make sense for folks?
Mhm.
Sort of.
Marilyn?
Yeah, I was going to go back a moment or two when we said we're all hurt. Children, we're all hurt in some ways. But what has been an antidote to that for me, because I got caught up in a lot of that in the Christian tradition, in the evangelical kind of world in my early life as well. And what began to shift for me was to really believe and take into myself that I'm a creation. I'm enough. I'm whole, and everyone is. So yes, we're all hurt. We also have this inner peace, and I mean PIECE, the inner part of us that is eternal. And when you preached the other Sunday, Stephen, on creation, it just struck me. And I've often used this word to myself and to people that I see. And God said it was good. And in my head, and God said, Marilyn, you are good. And I needed to hear that in my soul and my spiritual being, and just grasp a little bit of that too, as a kind of antidote to I'm not who I'm supposed to be, whoever that is, etc. All the difficult issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the, among the early Christians, they used to, and I think the Anglicans still do this, when they pass the peace, they say, the peace of my spirit greets the peace of your spirit.
Mm.
Right? So like, there is a beautiful soul inside of absolutely every single person.
Mm.
And we look at each other across this divide, which isn't one of space, but of clutter.
Mm.
Right?
And I find too that so often I can believe it about and for everyone else. And then I have the arrogance to think, well, yeah, but it couldn't apply to me. Is it? That was another thought that propelled me. It's true for you, it's true for me.
Yep, exactly. Rebecca?
I just wanted to mention, maybe specifically for Donna, I put in the chat something that was really, really helpful for me starting I'd been an on and off meditator, but starting a consistent everyday practice. It's a free MBSR program, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. I think it was developed by John Kabat-Zinn. It's an 8-week program, totally free online, and it's really, really helpful. And like the first meditation is literally eating a raisin. It's a very good place to start. So I really recommend that if you're looking to start a practice.
Thank you, Rebecca. I took that down actually,
Yeah,
so
no
I'm going to
problem.
look it up tomorrow. Thank you.
No problem.
It's funny, as I was preparing for this, I was reminded that, at one point Jesus is sitting around with a whole bunch of followers inside, and his mother and a couple of brothers are outside, right? Mm-hmm. And the message comes in, hey, your mom's outside. And he goes, who are my true family? These are my true family. And in another spot, he says, you can't follow me unless you give up on your mothers and your fathers and your brothers and your sisters. And that always sounds so awful, right? Because we think of Christianity as being something which should support families. But what if he was talking psychologically? You're not going to get to the kingdom of God as long as you're still obsessing about mom and dad and all the things they did to you.
Good one.
You got to get over that, people.
Yeah.
I think, I am convinced that the New Testament in particular is written to be read at several levels. And we always start with the literal, but it gets really interesting when you start reading it spiritually and psychologically. Because there you go, oh, that actually lines up. So it's 10 to 9 now. So we've done lots of work today. Thank you very much for coming out And having read the book, and those of you who haven't read the book, you may now be intrigued and want to. He's done lots of interviews. Like if you go on YouTube and you look up his name, you'll find all sorts of interviews with him. And he's a really nice guy. Actually, he's not the least bit intimidating or anything. He's a very genuinely kind man, it seems. But his books are very, very clearly written. And so next week we'll talk about what works to get rid of those blockages, or at least to try and grapple with them and, don't let them be in control. And I hope that we'll get a chance to, share what works for all of us, what sorts of things have helped us. And we'll talk about what Singer suggests and what some of our spiritual traditions like Christianity can suggest.
Thank you, Steve.
so much, Stephen.
Stephen.
Thank you for coming out. And people who haven't shown up tonight can show up next week. We'll be doing the second half of the book, but if they read real quick or watch a bunch of interviews, they'll be able to catch up.
Great.
And thank you for the
so
horses.
Okay.
much. Lovely. Thank you, Stephen.
Good night,
everybody.
Steve. Thank you. Good
Enjoy
night.
your raisins, everybody.
Gonna go see if the Blue Jays